And let's just spell it out for you. ECHOPLEX.
They fucking laugh at us! I'm white, and I've got everything I need. No one clutches their purses when they're in a room alone with me. And I can drive for any neighborhood I please at any hour, and the police don't do a thing. So if I see a penny on the ground, I leave it alone and fucking flip it. I'm a straight white male in America. I've got everything I need. I'm a guy getting paid more than a girl with a degree. And I can walk down the streets after dark, no one wants to rape me. And I can get a girl pregnant and just as easily flee. Just like my straight white male dad did to me. So if I see a penny on the ground, I leave it alone and fucking flip it. I'm a straight white male in America. I've got all the luck I need. I've got a pile of broken mirrors and I'm walking under ladders and I'm spilling tons of salt, but to me that doesn't matter, cause my skin and my gender and my orientation are the best things to have if you live in this nation. I recommend it highly. If I see a penny on the ground, I leave it alone and fucking flip it. I'm a straight white male in America. I've got all the luck I need. Shit's gonna work out for me, cause I'm a straight white male in America. I've got all the luck I need.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Intellectual Dollar Tree. We do the show live every Wednesday, rain or shine, because we are indoors, on Twitch at twitch.tv/Echoplex Media. You can support this project by going to patreon.com/Echoplex, or a new way to subscribe, kind of exactly like Patreon. You go to eplex.store and subscribe there. There's 2 tiers there, and you get all the great stuff that you would get on Patreon. Plus, you get a discount in the store if you are a member there. And if you're already a Twitch sub, you get a little bit of a discount on your membership over there. So that's just, I called it a membership. It's just another way to support this project. Also in that swag shop is a bunch of great stuff. We're adding more stuff. My new favorite is the hat that just says tinfoil on it. It's the coolest tinfoil hat you could ever wear. Already sold one within an hour of putting it up. You can find me on Grindr. I'm Producer Dave.
And I'm HK Perrin. You can find me on Mastodon at hperrin at port87.social. And you can also find me on a really crappy Fediverse website called nesso.social. I built it in 1 month and it's terrible. Don't go on it.
Fantastic. Fantastic. Find him there too. It's on GitHub too. You can audit his code.
Yep. I built it for a hackathon, so it's not staying up.
All right. Well, I was gonna do a Steven Pinker on why everyone's wrong to criticize him, but that's like kind of in the weeds, and I think I'm gonna save that for the next time you're on an adventure. So we're gonna do someone that you're less of a fan of maybe than you once were after our last encounter with him. We're gonna do the Cosmic Skeptic.
Yeah, he didn't do a great job on that interview we watched. It wasn't terrible, but it wasn't great at all. I would argue not even good. It was just okay.
My take so far is that he sees how many views someone like Constantine gets and didn't want to piss him off too much.
Possibly, yeah.
I mean, and he's young, whatever. He'll see the stuff as a problem. Here he is with a posh white supremacist Douglas Murray. I mean, if he doesn't basically just call this guy a racist asshole during this, there's no hope, right? Like, because Douglas Murray is like a special case.
Yep. Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry, posh gay racist asshole Douglas Murray. Don't want to leave the identity politics out.
So welcome back to the Cosmic Skeptic podcast, everybody. Today I am joined in the studio by Douglas Murray, who is, of course, the author and journalist, founder of the Center for Social Cohesion, and associate editor of The Spectator. But you'll probably know him, if you do know him, most for his publications in 2017, wasn't it? The Strange Death of Europe. And as if you hadn't annoyed enough people with that, you've decided now to take on 4 more equally controversial issues in the madness of crowds, a link to which is available in the description. But thank you for being here.
It's a great pleasure.
So
Far.
Yeah, so far, good so far, right? The last time I saw you in person, not that you'd have any reason to remember this, but was after your event at the O2 Arena with Sam Harris and Jordan Peterson.
Right.
And, you know, I was there again recently listening to John Mayer, who'd sold out the arena. And I couldn't help think, I was sat at the back looking at all these people thinking, here are these epitomes of pop culture. John Mayer, Ariana Grande, One Direction, selling out these arenas. And the last time I was here, I was listening to you. It's one thing to speak in front of a crowd. What on earth is that kind of experience like, to speak in front of an arena? To American listeners who don't know, that's one of the largest venues in the United Kingdom. I can't imagine what that must have been like.
Yeah, we 2 nights earlier, Jordan, Sam, and I had done the 3 Arena in Dublin with a similar number of people on a Saturday night in Dublin.
I feel like if I were running this show and Douglas, you know, I was interviewing Douglas Murray, I wouldn't put my logo next to him up on the screen. It's a real bad look.
I'd be hesitant to do so as well, but you know, these are just they're just having a polite conversation about ideas, though. HK, you gotta remember that.
Well, I think we were the first writers to play the O2,
Right.
although since then, regrettably, Michelle Obama has stolen that.
Unfortunately,
regrettably, why would you regret that you and Michelle Obama, like, that's a pretty high honor to have been like speaking at the same place that Michelle Obama is. She's way more popular than you, dude. That's what's regrettable. She probably sold more tickets than you guys did.
Also has performed at the O2, but it's an amazing thing. I have to say that of all the things one can be pessimistic about these days, that isn't one of them.
right.
The idea that 10,000 people, mainly young,
there's probably another reason why he said regrettably, specifically about Michelle Obama.
to listen to
Probably.
a discussion which
Maybe a variety of reasons.
I was moderating it, but I mean,
Why pick just one?
certainly, Jordan and Sam's contributions were, at an incredibly high intellectual level. And I think if even 10 years ago or 5 years ago, you'd said that would be the sort of thing that could happen.
Yeah.
At this time, people wouldn't have believed you. They'd been amazed.
Yeah, well, that's what Mr. Pangburn said to me, that he...
Mr. Pangburn, that's Travis Pangburn, who like challenged me to debate him in his Discord, like when I was talking crap in his YouTube comments, and I went in his Discord and he's like, "You're in the wrong channel. We can't broadcast in this channel." I'm like, "But we're already in this channel and I am broadcasting." I'm like, "But I'll go to whatever other channel you want, you fucking weird nerd." And then he called me an R-slur and kicked me out of his Discord. The Mr. Pangburn. Mr. Pangburn.
That's Sir Pangburn.
Sir Pangburn.
Yeah.
Sir Pangburn of Kicketh Daveth Outeth.
Actually laugh in his face when he suggested the idea originally. But
Right.
the thing is, the thesis of your book, in a sense, or at least what it's about, is this kind of the difficulty of holding the kinds of views that someone like Sam Harris with his criticisms of Islam, someone like Jordan Peterson and his criticisms of postmodernism, and yourself, of course.
Wait, you're like really like fucking, I'm sorry, dude, you're burying the lead on these views. Sam Harris, his criticism of Islam is all but gone, right? He doesn't talk about Islam at all, as far as we can tell anymore. That's fucking 10 years ago, Sam Harris. Sam Harris right now criticizing a lot of trans people, mostly got into the public eye in a big way again because of the Douglas Murray kerfuffle. Jordan Peterson, nobody's really talking about him in postmodernism unless they're doing like an impression of him, making fun of him, going, "Oh, the postmodernists." Nobody's talking about him with postmodernism. They're like, "What the fuck are you talking about? Why are, like, you know what I'm saying? Like, he's most famous for Beef and Benzos now." And then what did he say this guy's most famous for? like, because this guy's just famous for being a fucking white supremacist.
Jordan Peterson and his criticisms of postmodernism, and yourself, of course. The difficulty of holding those views in the mainstream, and yet here you are selling out an arena of people who are willing to come and listen. Does I mean, how does that speak to the points of your book? If you're able to do something like that, despite simultaneously claiming that anytime you try to say anything on Twitter, it's like a minefield out there.
Well, Twitter and the
Probably people just thought he was a different Douglas Murray.
I think that what's happening is that there are things that we know to be true, or at least very likely to be true.
He's wearing a particularly small watch.
Put beyond limits. Exactly by who and in what order you can debate, but that there are a set of issues which
Kind of distracting.
a lot of people, if not most people, know to be true and yet cannot say or cannot speculate upon in public. I mean, the one I finish, The Madness of Crowds, with, the issue of trans, is perhaps the most obvious of that, because we keep seeing the effects of
The issue of trans?
being able to have a debate about it, and we keep on seeing the anathematization.
I feel like this is a common trope in racists, is they'll think, oh, everyone else thinks like me, they just can't say it. And every once in a while, as a white person, someone will say like something super racist and be like, right? Yeah.
You'd be like,
It's just
nah.
like, fucking no, bro. You got the wrong guy here. I feel like these kind of guys just love to do that. They love to assume that you are also a racist because you're white.
Also, like,
So when he says like, there are tons of people that just are dying to say something, they just can't say it in public. Like, that's an assumption. That's a huge assumption on his part. And it's incorrect.
when he said the issue of trans and nobody wants to talk to you about it, I think like what they want is like a representative of all of trans to come speak with them, right? Like, and because like I'd talk to these people about trans issues. I wish they would be more likely to speak to me than maybe your average trans person, which is a fucking problem, right? Because then I'd be in there like fucking basically speaking on behalf of some other group of people. I'm a little bit closer because we're part of the, I'm queer and we're part of the queer community, and we do suffer some of the same bigotries, or if it's not the same, at least the fucking chorus rhymes. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, and, but what do you mean you can't debate it? That's all you motherfuckers talk about now.
Yeah. Like they spend hours a day questioning why they can't spend hours a day talking about something. It's like, you fucking are, man.
All that most people don't want to kill people. They don't actually want to incite riots against people, but they would like to be able to have conversations about important and tricky subjects without being anathematized.
Yes. So, I mean,
That's the thing, though, is like most people can have conversations about the things that they believe. Most people aren't bigots.
And they do this.
That is an assumption. I could be wrong, but I assume that most people aren't bigots. And I feel like if you survey people, most people have zero problem with trans people.
Or to the extent that they do have a problem, it's things they don't understand versus like, I am mad, right?
Yeah, like probably the one main issue that like the most people would have a problem with is like, should trans people be playing in sports as their as the gender that they've transitioned to? And that is a question that is best left to sports authorities, not anyone else.
Right, because they're the ones that are in charge. And also, like, all of a sudden, these people are big fans of women's fucking swimming. Get the fuck out of here. No, you're not. Right? Like, that's the other thing. Maybe even the fans of women's swimming could be involved in the conversation because those are the customers, right?
Yeah.
But this is ridiculous that they can't have these conversations. That's all these fucking people talk about is their bigotries and how they can't talk about their bigotries and their biases. And the other thing they do, and I already know he's going to do this. They're going to conflate the public with the having a conversation with my friend over a drink. Because I'll say you and I'll have a conversation over a drink, and we might blurt out some shit on over a drink that we'd never say on the air. Wouldn't be bigoted or whatever. It would just be a joke or some kind of energy we don't really want to put out there in the world. But it's fine to fucking point it at each other because we know each other pretty well. But that's it's so crazy listening to this. I just can't wrap my head around it. I think these people are mad at my mom when she told me when I was 8 to think before I opened my damn mouth. I think that's who they're mad at mostly.
Bring up specific accusations, let's say, of transphobia, for instance. Is it the attempt to discuss the question, or is it the holding of the view that's contrary to the mainstream?
Well, the truth is it can be anything.
I mean, if you hold a transphobic view, you are transphobic.
Really
like,
difficult.
That's the definition of the word.
An accusation, even if it is implausible, or even if it is insincerely made.
Oh, that's like bad faith shit.
Accusation of a truthful claim. So that somebody saying that is transphobic or that is racist does have the effect of silencing a person or
no, that's your decision whether or not you shut the fuck up and think about what you just said. That's your decision. Yep. I can't, by calling you a racist on my podcast or on Twitter, I cannot make you stop saying racist things.
Yeah, I believe we've been calling him a racist for like over a year at this point, and he has not shut the fuck up.
No, he has done the opposite. He's become more and more popular, I think, since we first started covering him.
Yep. But also, like, what he's arguing is that he should be able to say racist things, and no one should be allowed to say that he is saying racist things.
Or at least that it would be uncouth to say that he's saying racist things, right? At least that it stifles conversation.
If you say that what I said is racist, then how are we ever going to talk about it? How about we don't need to?
Right.
I think that black people are just as human as you or I. How about that? Period. The end.
Right. What if I don't like you? What if is that an option? Like,
seem like a very sort of person you wouldn't want to be near. And people take these things to heart. Now, I think people have got to be a little bit more resilient against that because there's an obvious play going on there simply to win by labeling all opponents for your own personal convenience.
An obvious play. It's
an
obvious play, Dave.
To label all opponents. Do you know, I've had conversations with people about issues I don't agree with them on. We've had many conversations with Madison Star Moon. We never called her a racist because that's not really her problem. I've had conversations with flat earthers who I didn't think were racist. So guess what I didn't call them, HK?
You didn't call him a racist. I actually just had a very heated discussion, argument with someone recently about specifically affirmative action. And he said many things that I think are untrue arguments. But I never called him a racist because he didn't come across as like he wasn't saying anything racist. He was respecting minorities in what he said. But he was still arguing a racist point. You know, arguing against affirmative action is like you're on the side of the racists, which is dangerous territory, but he's still not racist. So, you know, this idea that like if I disagree with someone and I could potentially label them a racist, that I will, is like, that's ridiculous. And it shows that like his arguments aren't non-racist.
And
If everyone's labeling you a racist, guess what?
Right. As the media wench often says, maybe the problem's you. Maybe it's you.
Yeah. Type of phobe. But the cost to our society of not being able to think about things seems to me to already be evident.
I understand. Is there any truth in the claims of the kind of identitarians that you're criticizing in the book?
Yeah, of course. I mean, this is the problem, isn't it? Wholly unjustifiable claims are unlikely to get anywhere. the kind of claims that do are ones that start in a reasonable place.
He's like, those other racists, the social justice warriors might have a point, but for me, well, I didn't start from an unreasonable place, so the social justice warriors don't have a point with me, but for the other racists, the very uncouth ones, the ones who don't speak in a posh British accent, for example, that don't write books, those are the ones. Okay, that's such a crazy question.
Last book, The Strange Death of Europe, I did this with the immigration question, and I knew from writing and talking about that and traveling all around the world to research that, I knew that the problem with the immigration question was not that there's no reasonable case for immigration.
Right.
The problem is that there is. There's a reasonable case for asylum. And millions of people around the world who have reasonable asylum claims. And
it's the case, and it's the sense that claim, the legitimate claim, is so strong that it embeds itself so deeply in people that.
So he thinks asylum is the only. Like, he didn't say this, but he's implying that
I don't think he's
asylum
even
is the
implying
only. What's that?
I don't even think he's implying that.
That asylum is the only reason to immigrate?
Yeah, I don't think he's implying that at all. I think he just used it as an example. Again, when people come at us for the things we say on this show, when I say us, I mean me. So I'm gonna have to like, I don't think he was implying that.
Okay, I got the impression that he was, but maybe I'm wrong.
The intuition to just follow it.
Well, so for instance, if you do, just to stick on that one for a moment, if you pretend that there is basically no difference between somebody fleeing war and somebody fleeing economic deprivation, and because you happen to be in favor of open borders, you're willing to pretend that divide doesn't exist, you can do a lot of bullying.
But wait a minute, my position on that is that the divide is just not that great between if somebody wants to come to the United States, or in his case, the United Kingdom, and it's a war that they're fleeing, or if they're fleeing abject poverty. I really don't think that I don't know that the chasm is as wide as he would maybe be trying to have people believe, because abject poverty is pretty fucking bad, right? Like,
yeah, either one will kill you.
Yes, just in different ways, in different amounts of time.
Space,
of
your opponents. So, but as I say, I mean, I spoke to enough migrants and indeed refugees in the years I was researching that book to know that, these things are harder than that. They're harder than any side is often willing to say.
Yeah.
And as I said at that time, people dream impossible dreams from all directions. But one of the things that came across when I was researching that is exactly one of the things that's also informed my thinking and writing in The Madness of Crowds, which is there are these issues. I do them one by one, as you know.
I find it odd that he's talking about his book, The Madness of Crowds, and they opened up the whole thing talking about how great it was. He had like 10 or 12,000 people at an arena. I don't know. Maybe I'm weird. Isn't that a crowd?
Women, race, and trans, where we've basically prevented ourselves from being able to have a reasonable discussion. For instance, relations between the sexes. I mean, I know the minute I start talking about this, most people just get very sweaty and worried because there's not much to be gained, they think. And there's an awful lot to lose.
It's like a why bother kind of thing, right?
Yeah, it's a risk analysis.
Yeah.
So I don't think that's why. I think it's because they know what you're going to say, and what you're going to say sucks.
And I feel like when you're talking about relationships between men and women, I mean, maybe I have something to say at like the extremes where I notice like things that are extreme. But like as a gay man who's never really been in a relationship with a woman, maybe that's one of those places where I should just listen to men and women who are in relationships with one another instead of running my fucking mouth about it. Because I've been in relationships with men. And so I'm not going to, it's not that I can't talk about it or whatever. It's that like I should do more listening because I don't experience it. Just like I would hope that straight people would do more listening when they listen to men who are in mostly relationships with men, or women who are in mostly relationships with women, talk about that kind of dynamic,
I think he meant more like how men should treat women in society and how women should treat men in society, though.
Possibly.
And I've never heard specifically how he thinks that should happen, but based on his other arguments, I can't imagine that he has a very good perspective on that. Like, maybe we should all just respect each other. Can we do that? Would that be good?
You know what I also find interesting that probably nobody cares about, especially the people on the pod that can't see it. It looks like our friend, the Cosmic Skeptic here, has this big impressive mixer in front of him. Said it looks like he knows what he's doing, but then hiding under his laptop is a 2-channel interface. Did you see that?
Yeah. He might be using the mixer for maybe a soundboard. An XLR soundboard.
I just noticed things like this.
And recognizing that that's an approach that people take implies that maybe there isn't. It's maybe you're interested in what's true.
His audio does sound good, though.
Particularly many implications, but it seems like you're saying more than that. It seems like you're saying that the reason that you want to talk about these ideas is because they are of crucial importance.
Yes. I mean, there are things that...
They're really skirting around, quote, these ideas, unquote.
Right, they're talking about something. It's a layer of abstraction away from an actual conversation, which is, again, like one of the things. Isn't it great that we're able to have this conversation, but they're actually not even there yet, right?
Yeah, I think what they're essentially talking about is it okay to be bigoted, and should bigots be ostracized from society? But why don't they just say that? Why don't they just say, like, look, I have views that are extremely against trans people. Why are all these people saying that my views are problematic? Like, mostly because they are.
That do not do very much harm.
Would you rather, so you say there are things that are held to be true that are not. But I mean, depending on the issue, would it not perhaps be more accurate or even more...
like, how about fucking name one?
To get your point kind of accepted, to say that there are certain things that, whilst perhaps not true, have just not been proven to be true. I don't know if they're false, but the real problem is that is not so much that I know they're false and you won't let me talk about it. It's that you haven't actually presented...
Well, if I see what you're saying, the several fold. Firstly, I should have gone on to the second part of what I was going to say about your point, about your question about whether the people I'm criticizing are onto anything. And when I was saying yes, I should stress that in each of the cases I write about in this book, it's obviously the case that historically there has been homophobia.
Yeah.
It's obviously the case that historically women have been at a disadvantage in many societies. It's obviously the case that there has been racism.
What do you mean when you qualify all of these things by saying historically or has been?
That it's worth bearing in mind that the era we're in doesn't come from nowhere, among other things, and that we may be on some kind of... If we are on some kind of correction course, for instance, it's among other things, it's worth bearing in mind the possibility that we might be in periods of overcorrection. So it's worth placing our current situation in some kind of historical context.
What he means is, everyone's so racist against me because I'm white.
Yeah, it's kind of baked into this. The problem is that if you didn't know anything about him, you wouldn't know what views he was talking about. You would have maybe grokked that he's transphobic or racist or whatever, right? Because he's complaining about being called those things. But you wouldn't, we're like 10 minutes into this and they haven't brought up like a single issue. Like if I'm like, when I interview somebody, I'm going to be out in 45 minutes, right? I just don't want to I just think that if you're going to talk to somebody, especially if you disagree with them, just get out of that shit in 45 minutes, get to the fucking point and get out. Right. And like, they're spending an awful lot of time here kind of hand wringing about the state of discourse. And like, you can't do anything about the state of discourse because everyone's involved, right? Like, what are you going to do about it? Like, say you're fucking
and you can't get mad that you're labeled a racist by everyone because you're saying racist things. Like, I mean, I guess you could get mad at that, but it's not going to change. No one's going to hear your cries of, oh, I'm not racist, you're the racist, and go, you know what? I guess everyone else is racist. You're the only one that's not racist.
That is because if, for instance, somebody is deeply worried about sexism or misogyny or homophobia or racism, yes, there have been good reasons to worry about that. Is there a good reason to weaponize it now and allow people to make other political points by using those issues? I'd say not. But
okay, name those political points that people are saying.
Been rooted in the past, certainly in a legitimate cause.
Like everything he's arguing against is hypothetical.
It's not even hypothetical. It's like so vague as to be to the point where he's not saying anything almost.
Yeah. Like the people against me are saying things and I disagree with them. Okay.
Okay, so
Me too, buddy. Me too.
that we still live in a racist culture. Is that an accurate statement, or is that a false statement, or is it kind of somewhere in between?
No, I think it would be a defamatory generalization about
Right.
a society like ours in Britain to say we live in a racist culture, just like it is to say we live in a patriarchal culture or a sexist culture or a rape culture or any of these other.
But he's acting like these things are binaries. Where like all of a sudden one day, racism gone. That's not how any of this works.
Yeah. He's also just making this point without any sort of like evidence.
Well, I mean, I don't go to a discussion and cite studies or whatever. But the problem is, I don't even think he's really making any points. This is mostly like just complaining that people don't like what he has to say and are saying so and are writing articles about him because he's like a public figure at this point. And it's like, well, dude, fucking. Again, Kara Swisher, when she talked to Sam Harris, she's like, you want to be loud in the courtyard. What do you think? Nobody's going to talk back to you? It's like,
He's also, he's finally answering Cosmic Skeptic's earlier question when he was saying, historically, of course, there's been racism and sexism. And then Cosmic Skeptic goes, okay, well, is there still racism and sexism? And he, waved his hands and played like he wasn't going to answer it. But right here, he's answering it. He's saying no. He's saying there's no longer racism. There's no longer sexism.
right.
And I just have to hard disagree on that.
I would say that he's suggesting that the progress means that we're done, that we're at the end of the road, right? It's basically suggesting that because you've been on the road for 3 hours from San Francisco, you must already be in Los Angeles, right?
I guess so.
Claims that get thrown around. That isn't to say that there isn't racism, that there can't be sexism, that there can't be homophobia. Of course there can be.
So the argument would be that those things exist, but they're not. What is it? Institutionalized? What is it that makes it kind of a cultural phenomenon rather than just a thing that exists within a culture?
Well, first of all, to say that a thing can exist, that there are individuals, for instance, who may have unpleasant views themselves, and to then extrapolate that out and use it not just as something that the whole culture is meant to suffer from, but as the defining issue of the culture. We don't live in a society which, for instance, provides welfare to people who are not able to look after. No, we live in a racist society.
Right. But so I
That's interesting.
So,
That's interesting that he kind of conflated the two, right? The idea that that he said, oh, well, we don't have a welfare, so we're racist. It's interesting that he would go there, that he's like baked into that is that people who are not white are the recipients of welfare and social programs.
Yeah. But that's not even what people like you and me say when we say we live in a racist society. We don't mean that everyone in our society or everyone running our society or even the majority of those people are racist. What we mean is society was built in a way that institutionalized racism, and those systemic racist problems still exist. You
Right.
could completely solve the problem of individuals being racist. Like, let's say right now we just completely solved, no one at all is racist anymore. The problem of racism would still exist because it's not the people that are doing the racism. It's the system that we've built that does the racism.
Right. It's like a barge. It takes a while to turn.
Yeah.
The point I would make is that although some people do believe that something like racism is what defines society, that's not necessary to say that we live in a racist society in the sense that you can say that that we have a red apple, but it's not the redness that defines the apple. It just happens to be red, right? And in the same way, it may not be racism that defines all of our social institutions, but you could still perhaps, or at least the argument can still be made that the society, one of its attributes is racism.
You could make that. I think that there's...
And you don't think
I
that's
don't
true?
think that, no.
You don't.
Are you making that argument, host?
Okay, so if it were true, this is something I was interested reading your book about, like the criticisms of concepts like intersectionality and the criticisms of positive discrimination and things. Would you still be as critical and as suspect of these approaches towards society if we did live in a racist society?
Well, if we did live in a racist society, then many of the claims that people make would be legitimate, and you'd have to act on them. And you'd have to act on them, I'd submit, in a general way as well as on a case-by-case basis.
Right.
But it is extremely hard, I would submit this day, for any fair-minded person to look at a society like Britain and claim that racism is endemic, or sexism and misogyny are endemic. And when somebody interprets an entire society in that way, I think that you then got to start separating out, are you talking about a critic who wants to improve you, or are you talking about somebody looking at you as an enemy?
Right.
This is such a hostile interpretation of a society. I don't think it can legitimately be being made by people who simply want to make minor improvements in it.
Yeah. Well, the reason
But that's the thing is some people, like a lot of people want to make non-minor improvements. People want to do things that someone like Doug Murray and maybe the host here would think are drastic. I know some of the things I would like to see happen might be considered drastic by other people, but like, why does it matter? Like, why does it matter that somebody's, this is almost like the good faith, bad faith argument again. Why does it matter if someone's argument, or if somebody's saying, hey, you know, we live in a rape culture, or we live in a misogynistic or sexist or racist society? Why does it matter what their intent is, right? We keep coming back to this. What if my intent is to tear down the system? Does that mean my claim of the system being biased against certain people is incorrect? Or does this person just not agree with how I intend to go about fixing it? Those are actually two entirely separate matters. I'm more of an incrementalist than a tear down the system kind of guy, honestly. I'm the kind of person who he would ostensibly like if only there were bigotry and racism baked into our society, which clearly there's not, because Doug Murray says so.
Nope.
Is because I don't think it's particularly interesting, although it might be important to discuss whether society is racist. The reason that I'm asking you isn't just to get your opinion on that, but to say that it seems to be that you're implying, therefore, in saying that if we did live in a racist society, perhaps these methods would be appropriate. That the problem is not, in fact, the approach. The problem is that they've got the context wrong. But the actual attitude, the kind of, in order to solve a problem like this, something like intersectionality would be a good approach.
No, intersectionality would still not be a good approach. Intersectionality couldn't be a good approach in any...
That's the opposite of what he just said.
Also, like, not for nothing, like, intersectionality is just the simple idea that you aren't just one thing, that you're several things. Like Doug Murray is white, posh, rich, and gay. Those are all fucking things that people know about him, and they will affect how society sees him. And so the idea that we don't have intersecting identities, and that to the extent that we do, we shouldn't think about it, is just to turn your fucking brain off.
Yep.
Like, I'm a white man. Boom, I've done intersectionality right there, haven't I? Like,
you have. You can only describe yourself as one thing at a time.
Like this always drives me nuts. This always drives me nuts because people, intersectionality. And but then his whole thing is that like he's a gay conservative. Well, that's that's intersectionality. Like what are they taught? What do they think intersectionality is?
I think they think it's extreme left views. I think they just kind of lump everything in as extreme left views.
Oh, man, this is frustrating.
Right. But
because it's demonstrably untrue.
Well, can you say that with confidence? Because the reason why you say that
it's demonstrably untrue that people have multiple intersecting identities.
Been trialed, and so people can't go around saying that it's true. But if it hasn't been trialed, then how can you say it's false?
Well, no, I say that it's false because the claims it makes are demonstrably false. The idea that, for instance, the central intersectional claim that the world is based on a set of interlocking oppressions, and that if we unlock
that's not intersectionality, though. Intersectionality is just the intersection of your identities. In fact, intersectionality in my case, I'm 46 now, and I'm white. Those are not oppressive factors. Those are factors that work in the opposite direction of oppression for me. If I get pulled over by the cops because I'm 46 and white, the cops are likely to leave me the fuck alone. So it's like not the intersectionality. It goes both ways. It isn't just the like intersecting bigotries. It's also intersecting privilege. Like what this guy hasn't even like been exposed to like just the basic notion of intersectionality. It is like it's like describing my laptop as Black and Dell, right? It's like you're describing things using multiple. You're describing people's identities using multiple fucking adjectives or descriptive terms. That's all it is. I don't know who the fuck they're getting this stuff from, because it's nonsensical. It just doesn't make any fucking sense, even on its own terms.
I mean, are we surprised that he's strawmanning the argument?
I don't even know if I guess so. He's like, yeah, it's really odd to like listen to like supposedly smart people who are like, their job is to be an intellectual, whose understanding of just a fucking word that people have been using for a very long time, and you can describe real simply in just a couple sentences. It is lacking compared to mine. I'm an idiot with a talk show host who sometimes drinks too much on my talk show, and I could be fucking 3 sheets to the wind, 2 a.m, drank half a handle of vodka during the post game, and somebody could be like, what's intersectionality? I might slur and kind of fumble over my words or whatever, but I'd be able to tell you what it is in just a couple fucking sentences. These guys are not idiots with talk show. I mean, maybe, I don't know, maybe they're idiots with talk shows. Maybe we're all just idiots with talk shows, and we need to get off of our high horse a little bit. I don't know.
You know the argument I make in the book, among other things. Yeah. This is demonstrable nonsense because it's very clear at this stage that gay and trans do not happen and work together. They do not interlock together. If you unlock trans...
What? But that's not intersectionality. That's it could be that you are a trans man who dates other men, and now you're gay, and so yes, trans and gay would intersect. But you could be a trans man who dates women or wants to sleep with women, and now gay and trans don't intersect for you because those aren't two of your identities. Those aren't two of the things you are. Like I can't fucking believe what I'm listening to here.
Yeah, I have no idea what he means by this. Like the most charitable interpretation I could possibly give him is he means that people aren't oppressed if they're gay and trans. Because I can't imagine he means that a gay trans person doesn't exist, because they just do.
He may be making this argument that the gay, lesbian, and bisexual, he may be getting like winding up for the argument that gay, lesbian, and bisexual people shouldn't necessarily team up with trans people, you know what I'm saying? Like that we shouldn't consider ourselves all one queer community. I feel like he may be winding up for that argument.
Maybe.
Because there's a lot of that going on. Although I think there's a lot of people on Twitter doing what I would have been calling digital gay face, which means you know it's on the internet. Nobody knows you're a dog. You know, it's that one. So I think he's winding up for that, saying that like cis, gay, lesbian, and bisexual people shouldn't necessarily ally with trans people. But my argument against that is like, well, you know, the bigotry I see being hurled at trans people, it rhymes a lot with what we saw for gay people like 30 years ago. So maybe we should ally with them because they need our help.
An enormous amount of oppression to gays, straight out.
And what does that look like?
Because we have the situation of, you might call it disappearing of young gay men and women.
So wait, his argument is that gay people are oppressed, but not trans people?
Let's go back to the beginning and
I did not see that coming.
What does that look like?
Because we have the situation of, you might call it disappearing of young gay men and women. One of the points of gay liberation was that gay people should be allowed to work out their sexuality themselves, and not be told that because they were gay, they were basically of the opposite sex, or a sort of that gay men like me were not sort of women in hiding,
right?
And that
people say that?
Are not just actually men, you know, manly women, sort of thing. This is a very basic thing.
But I don't think the trans activists are saying that.
Oh, they are saying that and a lot more. The whole campaign in trans at the moment is to say there are people who we can identify while they are children as being actually in the wrong body when, for instance, it's an effeminate young man.
Right.
Or a slightly manly girl, you know, what we might have called a.
I mean, generally, no, you don't assign trans to a child. The child just tells you, like you have a child who was born in a male's body, and you're raising them, and they're like 5 years old, and they say, "Mom, Dad, how come I'm not a girl?" And you kind of go, "Oh,
right.
Well, you can be if you want."
Yeah, he said they're disappearing gay people, and this is a big argument that I see from people I think who are often again doing digital gay face. I don't think like that there's I don't think there's a lot of people out there trying to tell young cis gay men or cis lesbian women or whatever that they're actually trans. I think that this is like I think this is just incorrect. I think that
I don't think that happens at all. Like,
I mean, you can't say it never happened, that it wasn't ever misdiagnosed or whatever as gender dysphoria. But I feel like as gay people have become more and more accepted by society, it's actually easier to live as a gay man than it is to like be a trans woman. So I don't know why like parents or mental health professionals would be pushing anyone in that direction if it didn't seem like the direction they want to go themselves, because you're like pushing that person into a direction where they're going to be discriminated against. So I don't know why anybody would push someone in that direction if it isn't pretty clear that that's what that person already thinks themselves, you know?
Yeah. I think to the extent that does happen, he might be talking about like cis people saying that.
Right.
Like cis people saying, "Oh, you like men? You must be a girl."
Right. And that's homophobia. That's like old kind of homophobia.
Yeah.
It's the emasculation of gay men is an old homophobia. Oh, you're gay. You must not be what I consider to be masculine.
Yeah. So like he's not talking about trans people. He's talking about homophobes.
Right. And he's talking about homophobes from like 20 years ago too, right? Like,
yeah,
this isn't very modern. None of this is very modern. I don't think this is happening. I just think that this is yet another way that people try to justify their bigotry.
Yeah.
The intersectional activists are actually saying that these things unlock at the same time rather than grinding in a really ugly and increasingly ugly way against each other. Or they would.
Okay, so if if you're born in a man's body, like me, for example, and you are straight, right? You like women, then if you transition to female, they do unlock at the same time. You become both trans and gay at the same time.
This is all so weird. This is all so weird. This has so far been pretty weak pushback from Cosmic Skeptic.
The case
Yeah.
that trans rights has to be unlocked, and it can only be unlocked if we also unlock institutional misogyny. Well, what do you do with the fact that so much of the male to female trans issue runs directly against what feminism has tried to do for the last century, directly against it, by
Like what?
basically embodying stereotypes about women that women have been trying to get away from since the first wave of feminism. And again, if the intersectional claims
Such as
were
what?
true,
Like, why does he never provide
wouldn't
any
be the
examples?
there wouldn't be these terrible grinding gears going on. It would become clear by this point that the whole thing frees us all up together, and it doesn't. But when I say that this hasn't been tried, I say that it's very unwise to, for instance, roll out things like bias training across all government departments, across an increasing number of corporate and parts of the corporate world, if it's not clear at this stage that this thing works, that particular aspect of it, the alleged bias identification and training. So yes, I think that there isn't a world in which the intersectional thing works, because on its own claims it's not.
How much you want to bet, though,
but
that
I think it's necessary
if it turns out bias training does work really well, he'd still be against it?
And it's not like this guy's at some corporation where HR is sending him to any of that shit anyway. This guy's an independent contractor who writes for The Spectator and goes on podcasts. Like, he probably hasn't even been to one of these trainings. So all he's hearing is if he's hearing about them, he's hearing about them from people who are like a self-selecting group of people who are going to complain to Douglas Murray about them. And so they're maybe going to tell him about those things in a fairly biased way.
Yeah. Like, I had zero problem with all of my bias training. I went through, like an online, like hour, sometimes 2-hour course once a year when I was at Google, when I was at LinkedIn. Those companies do that. They give you the online bias training seminars. And like, they're not doing that out of the goodness of their hearts, right?
They're doing that because legal
They're
says
doing it so that they're covering their ass.
Yeah, legal says they have to do it.
Yeah, which is like fine. Like, it's good that we have laws that make them do that to cover their ass. I agree with those laws, and I'm fine with the bias training because, like, to me, it was all, mostly old news. There was some things that I learned in those bias training, but most of the time it was just like, yeah, don't try and be conscious of your own biases, and don't go with your gut on things when you could think it through. Kind of just straightforward advice like that.
Out the intersectional bit, which is a specific claim, from other specific rights claims.
Notice how he moved on from the claims he was making about like trans acceptance erasing cis gay people, and maybe we'll get surprised here, but our host here didn't say shit.
Yeah, he's doing so in the other interview, I thought he was like just like bare minimum fine. In this one so far, he's been well below bare minimum. It is bad. This has been a bad interview so far.
I think it would be a shame if, for instance, if there were an element of society that were discovered to be really institutionally racist, if we had to then, instead of addressing that, address it only by going through the log jam of intersectional claims about it. In fact, that would probably be one of the worst ways to solve such a specific issue, And we see quite a lot of that at the moment, where people say, we can only solve this issue if we also solve X, Y, and Z. We hear this quite a lot at the moment within the anti-capitalist movement. You know, we can only address capitalism if we also address, you know, institutional misogyny and racism and et cetera, et cetera. It's such a large panoply of things that.
But no. It's that the anti-capitalists tend to be leftists, and they also care. They also will tend to care about sexism, homophobia, and racism because they're leftists. They don't like that shit either. It's it's not that those people are like, well, we have to solve everything at once. It's like the argument that I think he's trying to like straw man here is that like in solving these issues, we're going to have positive impacts on other issues that are hurting our society. Like if we have a positive impact, for example, on making capitalism better or whatever, it's going to help with some issues around race and homophobia, just kind of like as a splashover effect, right? And so just because the people who are interested in, you know, critiquing capitalism also happen to think that we live in a racist society, he's like extrapolating a lot from that, like just an awful lot from it, I think.
Mm-hmm. And I don't think if you had a solution, you know, to one of these problems, like if you were sitting there with a big old switch and you said, should I turn off the racism in society? No one's going to say, not unless you can also turn off the sexism at the same time. Like no one would say that.
Anything to do with each other. I noticed when I was, I went to witness the protests against Steve Bannon's talk at the Oxford Union not that long ago. And I remember there were lots of people there, and you had the typical Oxford against fascism signs, but you also had people carrying around things saying, save the NHS.
Yes, of course.
As if it's got anything to do with...
There's a class of person who wants to protest against everything. That's a perennial. There's never a protest that they can't turn up to with their banner of choice. It's a particular type of psyche, in my view. Most reasonable
people who care
really only turn up to a protest under serious duress when something very close to their own life is being affected. But a reasonable person does not.
So he's arguing against intersectionality, and then he's saying there's people that go to all sorts of these protests. Like, boy, I wonder why.
Waiting eagerly to latch on to any.
Well, unless they think
grievance.
that those kinds of issues that are so personally affecting and moving are embedded into the culture they're living in. At least you can understand why they might be of that mindset, even if you think it's wrong. If you thought that you lived in a society that was constantly challenging who you are, you'd probably have those picket fences by the door ready to go.
Possibly, although we've just seen the phenomenon of Extinction Rebellion, and
Indeed,
it's you know. The demographic of that, from what I saw in London, was people who hadn't had anything big to protest about since 1968, and love the whiff of the fumes of righteousness that they haven't had since then.
You think that's what it is? You think
part of it?
What?
Part of it.
I mean,
there's like a bunch of 80-year-olds out protesting right now. Is that what he's saying?
Yeah, that's funny because Extinction Rebellion is a bunch of young people who are willing to take drastic measures that some people think are cringe or whatever to draw attention to the climate crisis. That's what Extinction Rebellion is. They think that the climate crisis is going to cause us to go extinct. And so that's extinction. The second part is the rebellion. And so they are willing to rebel, to push the needle in whatever way they can to forego, prevent, delay what they believe is an extinction that is going to happen. It's a pretty easy thing to understand.
I think a more effective solution would be to eat the rich.
I mean, just to go back to the thing of like who would be protesting within the areas of the thing I'm writing about in The Madness of Crowds.
Yeah.
Obviously, there are some people who are deeply sincere in their view of what our society is. Mm-hmm. Largely, I would submit, because they've been told to believe this stuff by adults who are themselves deluded or wrong. But I think it's very sad, but I think it's visibly.
This is this thing too. It's the chemtrails people make this argument that, oh, you only believe that because you were told to, but I figured out what's really going on by myself. I hate that. I hate that kind of argument. It's like, no, I assume that the people who I don't agree with have some agency. I don't know. I know it's crazy to think that I think the people that disagree with me have in fact thought these things through most of the time.
Yeah, or at least attempted to.
Right. Like, but no, he's like, oh, they're just brainwashed by someone else. And it's like, well, that's a really convenient thing to think about people who don't agree with you. Madison Star Moon believes the same thing. Good job, intellectual guy.
I've seen too many cases. I've spoken to many people who actually.
But then, like, wouldn't you have to argue against the person that's doing the brainwashing?
We live in the most oppressive society imaginable, and that's because they don't have a historical memory going back before last week.
Yeah.
Literally, no one is saying that. What the fuck is wrong with him?
Anybody anywhere who believes that the society is oppressive in any way, if you're like, hey, could you imagine how it could get worse? They're like, yep.
Yeah. Yeah. Like, just everyone will say, yeah, Nazi Germany would be worse.
Right. It could get worse. That's why we're trying to put the brakes on shit right now. Actually, act like you know.
Yeah, exactly. Like, we don't want it to get there again. It's been there before. We didn't like it.
Before last week.
Yeah.
And,
do you think that's true? I hate to interrupt, but do you think it's true that they're saying that it's the most oppressive society imaginable?
Well,
I mean, that seems a bit of an exaggeration.
It's at least that it's exceptionally
Yes.
unfair. They don't. I mean, one has to almost get
How
anecdotal.
about just name a single person ever who has said that? Just
I've
one
spoken to too many
person.
people, if I may say so, sort of your generation, who have adopted the hysterical attitude, and who, when you dig
And Dave,
down,
I know that you
just
say
have
you like to tell me, oh, I'm sure there's one crazy person on Twitter who said that. This time, I honestly don't even think there's one crazy person on Twitter who has ever said that.
No, I don't think so either. If you just ask, again, anybody, you say, could it get worse? They go, yep, there. You've fucking destroyed this guy's fucking argument.
Yep.
less reason to be hysterical than any generation in history.
Yes.
I mean, I was speaking, again, sorry to get anecdotal, but there was a young lady in an audience I was speaking with recently who was confronting me afterwards and and she was telling me all of her concerns of her generation. She said, there's North Korea, is developing nuclear weapons. And I was like, your parents and grandparents grew up under the shadow of total annihilation.
Yeah.
Okay. Total global nuclear annihilation.
Therefore,
My father remembers
you're
going
not
to
allowed to
bed
worry about it.
his father saying to him, we may not wake up in the morning, so make sure you
Yeah.
say your prayers tonight.
Also, not for nothing, the person he's talking about, it was probably at one of his talks, right, at a university, and this person was probably like 20. Nothing wrong with being 20. Plenty of smart 20-year-olds. But all these anecdotes these people come up with are fucking teenagers who aren't media trained, probably aren't even allowed to hold the fucking mic. They're standing there with security holding the mic at an event where most of the crowd is against them, and they're probably nervous, and they're probably not going to be the most articulate motherfucker in the world because they're not up on stage. They're not a fucking public intellectual. So that's all well and good that like some 20-year-old like was inarticulate and okay. Like that's what I'm like.
And also, like, why aren't they allowed to be worried about North Korea having nukes? Like, what? Because people used to be more afraid of nukes. Now we can't be afraid at all of nukes.
I wonder what that's interesting. I'd like to draw a parallel here because these people are all freaking out about crime, like a slight uptick in crime in the cities, right? By their logic, my argument should be like, well, I don't know. Have you ever heard of the 90s? Violent crime was at like double the rate it is now in most major cities. So maybe you should just shut the fuck up. You can actually apply that dumb argument to anything, right? If it was ever
Okay.
worse than it is now, then shut up.
Yeah. I would say that is not the best argument. I would say you can't extrapolate a trend from one data point.
Right. And the trend is on violent crime is downward still. I'm just saying like when they say that you, I mean, my response is something along those lines. I'm like, hey, the trend's been downward since the mid 90s and it's been pretty consistent. The fact that it ticked back up a little bit in some cities, maybe wait a little bit, see what happens. Wait and see.
Yeah. If it keeps going up, sure, that's a problem. But if it goes back down, Wasn't a problem.
What if it like hit like the bottom and it's like bouncing off of the bottom, right? That's the best place to be, right?
Bouncing off the bottom.
Okay, that was just a normal household at the height of the missile crisis.
Yeah.
and so yes, there is something of just a terrible lack of historical context about what we're going through at the moment. But one of the things,
But even if you have historical context, you can still be worried about modern society.
And you can be worried about nuclear proliferation. Like you can be. I'm concerned if more countries, even if the Soviet Union crumbled. Well, guess what? Russia's still there, and they still got a lot of them fucking nukes. So, like, even so, like, you can still be worried about the proliferation of nuclear weapons because these are fucking doomsday devices, and it doesn't matter which country has them, right? Like, it doesn't matter which country has them or how terrified it is reasonable to be of them. They're terrifying weapons of death.
Yep. Instant mass death. Yeah. This is a really like astoundingly stupid argument that he's making, that just because something was worse in the past, you can't be upset about the present. Like, that's been how things get better, is people upset about how bad the present is, right? It's not getting better because someone is saying, oh, well, the past was worse and now it's not as bad. Therefore, I don't know, like how would anyone make society better if everyone thought, because it's better now than in the past, we should stop trying to make it better?
Just imagine like, well, we used to not have a wagon, so why are you building a car?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
We used to not even have the
wrong
wheel.
with trying to make society better.
We used to not even have fire, so why are you building a furnace for your home?
Or persuaded that hysterical attitude is the appropriate attitude of a serious person, but rather the people who have cottoned on in the most cynical way imaginable to this whole thing and are at this stage using identity issues as pure political battering ram.
But now you're like all over the place, right? He was, this girl that woman, probably a young woman at the university, she was like worried about this nuclear weapon thing. And now I was like, well, there used to be like people were more afraid of nuclear weapons, building bomb shelters, and your parents and grandparents. And now actually I'm mad about identity politics. And it's like, dude, fucking come on, man. Fucking get the fuck out of here. Like finish a fucking, what is this, Austin Bennett?
Well, I think he knows that if he finishes a point, he's going to have to answer a rebuttal to that point. Because, Cosmic Skeptic here has not been good at going back to these ridiculous arguments that he's making. So he's been essentially getting away with making just absolutely moronic statements and not having to back them up.
I believe what we're experiencing here is we'll call it a slow rolling Gish Gallop.
Mm-hmm.
Those are in some ways the ones that are most interesting.
Yeah, but before talking about that, I'm interested in this example you give. You say that people historically in the UK have had good reason to be genuinely worried and to be protesting their governments because they lived,
and we less than anywhere.
Well, because they lived under the threat of total annihilation within their lifetimes. Well, is that not exactly the claim of the Extinction Rebellion protesters, that we live under the threat of total annihilation? And we need to do something.
Yeah, they do.
Are not their parents also saying, "Listen, this species of ours might be gone sooner than you can do anything about it." Right.
That is their attitude. Yeah.
Sure. And whether or not you agree with that or think it's wrong, right? You're kind of criticizing the mindset of self-righteousness and not recognizing that we live in a better time than ever in history. But if it is true, surely it makes sense in the same way that it made sense then to worry. It makes sense now to worry too. And in fact, you could say that the environmental crisis, if it's as bad as they're saying it is much worse than the threat of nuclear war, which at least could be abated by governmental action.
Well, it isn't worse. I mean, we're not.
Oh, so he's just fucking gonna just straight up climate change denial.
Yeah, apparently he's a climate scientist. I had no idea. Where did he get his education? His climate science education.
Like things have been going a little bit worse than most of the models have predicted. as far as I know. It's I just don't like, this is just like, well, it's not worse than the threat of nuclear annihilation. It's like, well, I think he believes that because in our lifetimes we're unlikely to see the worst of it.
Yeah, but my kids, if I have kids in the next few years, those kids definitely will see the worst of it.
If not them, then it'll be their kids, right? And once the ball starts rolling and we start having massive amounts of climate refugees because places on the planet become uninhabitable for human beings, you're going to think you've seen the worst of it. You're going to think you're living through the worst of it because you have like really no other perspective on it, right? You're like, what do you mean it's 130 in Libya? What the fuck?
Yeah.
Oh, no.
It's a beautiful sunny day, 78 degrees here in the North Pole.
Right.
I'm not an expert in climate, but I need an awful lot.
Really? Really? You're not an expert in climate, and yet you just made a blanket statement that all of the predictions of real climate scientists who are experts in climate, all of those predictions are just wrong.
Or overblown.
No evidence
I think,
given. They're just wrong.
I think you would say, here, we'll listen again here.
I'm not an expert in climate, but I need an awful lot more persuading from the people who take the Extinction Rebellion view.
So check this out, climate scientists. Stop what you're doing. Your job now is to personally convince Douglas Murray that the work you've been doing is valuable and that the peer review of it has been good and that the replication of your work has been valid. Just stop everything you're doing. Doug Murray doesn't agree with you. He just isn't convinced.
Also, he's not going to read any of your studies. So you have to personally convince him without him bothering to listen.
Right.
Immiserating our lives in order to agree to what they say.
Sure, but then
there's an awful lot more persuading to do.
Yeah, but then I guess that the people who are protesting aren't the people to be doing that, right? So there are people.
Aren't the people?
No, I don't think so. I think it's the job of the scientist and the researcher to do the persuading. And if you are persuaded, then you go and protest, even if you can't necessarily defend the science yourself. If you see what I mean. So
sure.
If you're mainly listening and seeing in the news the stories of these Extinction Rebellion protesters, and I see these videos on YouTube of people going and interviewing them about the issues and getting these sound bites of where they don't know what they're talking about, and it's like, well,
a lot of people don't know what they're talking about.
But do they need to be in order to be angry about something that they've become convinced of?
You ought to be very sure before you seriously disrupt everyone else's life, and you ought to.
But the fucking consensus is in. Like, this isn't. We're not at the pre-consensus part. The consensus has been like this since the fucking 70s. It's just that like a lot of the people doing the research were funded by oil companies, and we're like, here, sweep this under the rug. We have evidence of that. The consensus ain't changed much. The only thing is that like the models keep getting updated because things keep getting like the old models are like, oh, well, it's actually a little bit worse than what we thought of the old model. Like, I don't, this is happening.
Turns out we're really good at digging oil out of the ground.
Right.
And we're also really good at burning it.
Right. We've been doing it for a long time. Just even intuitively, the idea that dumping a bunch of fucking smoke in the atmosphere isn't going to do anything. It's like, get the fuck out of here, you dumbass.
Right. But keep in mind, he said he's not an expert. So we should literally listen to nothing he says in this interview.
Baked into this, too, is that we should reject expert consensus because Doug Murray specifically hasn't been convinced by it, which is wild.
Yeah. Wouldn't it be great if when someone says, I'm not an expert on climate science, they just shut the fuck up about it?
Or said, my best understanding of the expert consensus right now is X. Right?
Yeah. Like, we're not experts, so like we would love to shut the fuck up about it, but this guy's going off like he knows what he's saying, and we're just here to point out he's not an expert.
And the other thing is the experts as individuals will still defer to the expert consensus, which they may be a part of, but they're going to, you know what I'm saying? That they're not like one expert who's out there that knows the whole fucking shit. They like know like one sliver of it, and you put all the little slivers together and you get a fucking pie, and that's the fucking thing. That's like how it works. Like,
yeah, like how about we listen to panels of experts? Can we just have panels of experts go on like every TV show and talk. You know what? Have you seen the movie Don't Look Up? That's literally what they did in the movie, and everyone was still, they just still let it happen. And I think that's a predictive documentary.
Right, and that's
Forever.
That's the same kind of logic as saying, like, you need to be sure that this works before you enroll it in society. It's the same kind of thing.
Yeah,
like being sure that intersectionality works or something before rolling it
a
out.
certain amount of humility in this regard wouldn't be.
Oh, yes. He's so humble.
Sure. I suppose these people...
Listen to how humble he is.
Humility.
Sure.
Perhaps in more ways than one, actually.
Sure,
There's no time for humility, but there's also, they just don't have time for humility. I don't know, but I'm saying I'm just trying to kind of express, like, I wasn't on the street protesting with the Extinction Rebellion, but and yes, it's annoying when you can't get to work in the morning, but at the very least, I can kind of understand that if they've got, because take for instance, like you say, if we lived in a racist society, then protesting against racism would of course make sense, and maybe the reason it would be a silly thing to do in your view is because the racism doesn't exist. It's like, but you can recognize that if it were true, like, those protests would be intense. If we lived in a genuinely racist society, you'd probably be okay with people blocking traffic in order to get that fixed.
You might find better ways to address the problem than blocking.
Yes, protest is supposed to comfort the comfortable, actually.
Well,
Of course, you do what you could.
Yeah, you're supposed to protest quietly at homes where no one can see you. That's the whole point of protest.
It's like prayer.
I wouldn't like.
That's what they said to Colin Kaepernick, and then he just knelt, and they were like, "Nope, too far. Even that's too far."
Only in its methods.
But one of the things, looking back historically, at
Like, the cosmic skeptic could just, like, do the bare minimum here and be like, well, the consensus among the experts, not the Extinction Rebellion people who you think are cringe, is that this is a big fucking problem.
Yep.
Like, I guess not. No.
rights movement in America, which it's worth remembering had an awful lot of support from non-black Americans as well. One of the things that's just so striking about it, I compare it with the gay rights movement in America, particularly the March on Washington 30 years later, organized by the LGBT community, and compare it with a downer on the gay version. But the reason I mention it is because what is one of the striking things looking back on the civil rights movement, but the unbelievable moral force of the argument being made.
Right.
It wasn't, we're going to make you agree with us by disrupting your day, or by shrieking, or by behaving terribly, or by pissing off the entire society until it agrees with us. It was...
That's literally how protest is effective.
Moral force, you can't resist it. And that was what happened in the end. That was what happened.
And if it wasn't done in that manner, would you have less respect for the movement?
It wasn't done in that manner. People stood in front of a fucking military or National Guard and were sprayed with a fucking fire hose. And then they got back up and stood right the fuck where they were before. Like, this was a bloody battle. People were killed. This was a violent battle. It's just that it happened in the past, and unfortunately, it's been whitewashed. Like, what the fuck are they talking about?
Even given the rightness of its cause.
Well, I mean, for instance, there are good causes historically which have been ruined by people doing it the wrong way, for sure.
Which one?
I mean, for instance, I'm not at all a supporter of Irish nationalism when it seeks to change the territorial integrity of the United Kingdom, but Irish nationalism's cause was very significantly harmed in my own lifetime by the decision of a certain number of people to disappear a woman, a mother of 10 like Jean McConville, from her home, shoot her in the back of her head and disappear her body. It wasn't like, well, this didn't exactly help the Irish nationalist cause in the end.
Naturally.
So, of course, there are some causes that can be good, which are then wrecked by the behavior and the tactics of their followers.
Yeah, but on a kind of less wrecking ball approach to this, you take like the the approach of someone like Rosa Parks, or at least the
Oh, let's do Rosa Parks. They whitewashed the shit out of Rosa Parks too. Like, get the fuck out of here. Yo, I hope they bring up the suffragettes, because the suffragettes invented the mail bomb. Like,
Really?
yeah.
it's I've read at least that it wasn't as spontaneous as people make it out to be, but the fact that she disrupted people's day. She disobeyed the law. She probably stopped the bus from getting moving for a very long time. And someone might come along and say, "Listen, I get the whole civil rights thing, but like, you're just going about this wrong, Rosa Parks. Like you're poisoning the movement. You're just pissing everybody off. Come on, go knock on Parliament's door instead." But
several things. First of all, I mean, without getting into the striking thing about Rosa Parks was the dignity of the protest. I mean, that's what everyone remembers about it. Surely, it's that everybody it reflects still, and were struck at the time by the fact this was such a dignified way of protesting. It was triply hard to.
Oh, she was one of the good ones. Oh my God, I can't fucking believe this. I would not be able to sit through this. I couldn't imagine even like a moderate liberal sitting through this shit right here.
Yeah. Real bad job on the part of Cosmic Skeptic.
I think we're going to go a little longer.
This has been
than
extremely disappointing.
We're going to go a little longer than we usually do on the pod this week, if that's okay.
Yeah.
If you were so inclined to oppose,
you think so? It's more hard to oppose something like that, even though it exhibits a similar kind.
If you're dealing with a certain type of society, and I mean, this is my point: is that arguments with moral force in the right conditions, But to get back to the things that people are claiming at the moment, I mean, obviously every country is different, and one of the things I think we're suffering from at the moment is the rolling out of an interpretation of all democratic societies as being broadly similar. So that, for instance, the undeniable racial problems that specifically exist in America the interpretation of them. And the lens of that ends up getting rolled out across other countries as well. That's one of the phenomena that I think people haven't quite realized at the moment, but which is going on, so that a specific issue...
Wait, his argument is that because American society is racist, people are labeling British society as racist? Is that what he thinks? It
couldn't be that people see similarities, right? It couldn't be that.
Yeah. Like that is ridiculous.
Effectively the lens through which the issue is seen in all other countries.
Yeah.
That's definitely a problem.
You mentioned earlier about a potential overcompensation for the historical abuses of racism, sexism, things like this. What kind of things are you talking about?
I'm
very interested in overreach because...
No, you weren't. No, that wasn't the question. I would be fucking pulling my hair out at this point if I was conducting this interview.
Such as
making this guy eat it.
We've had, as I say, sexism. Do you correct by getting to equal? Do you correct by overcorrecting for a period? If you believe that the swiftest way to correct it is to have a period of overcorrection, which I think a lot of people knowingly or otherwise do think is the case.
Right.
When in that case would you identify that the overcorrection had happened, and how would you get back to equal? And I'm very interested in this in each of the issues I write about.
I think
book, because
I think he's arguing against affirmative action here. Playing the victim, saying, "Well, I'm disadvantaged as a white person because we've given so many advantages to black people." And I would say, absolutely not true. White people still have major advantages in both American society and British society. And if he doesn't believe that, then he's just a fucking moron.
I think
just look at the people who are in charge if you want to see who has the power.
There in the gay rights discussion, were gays exactly the same as straights or slightly better? Okay. Weird, really uncomfortable, not that common, but it was there. It was there.
Wait, what?
Does sexuality matter or does it not?
Right. Does sexuality matter? Does it not matter? Or does it matter more than anything else, for instance? Those are big differences just there. Are women exactly the same as men, or are they the same and magically better?
Wait, what?
Are black people the same as white people, or do they have something a bit better?
Yeah.
Now, I quoted, in the introduction, the talented young, as it happens, black American writer.
What the fuck is he talking about?
He mentions that among his contemporaries in America, he couldn't help noticing in recent years that they seem to think that he had some special moral insight because he was black. And that would be an example of overcorrection.
Wait, what?
You get past equal and go on to...
No, with that, it's
Well, is
life experience.
Right. Right.
A black person has the experience of being black that a white person does not have. That doesn't make them better, and it doesn't make them worse. It gives them a different perspective. That's it. So if you want to ask, what is it like being black? Don't ask a white person, because they don't fucking know.
You get past equal and go on to slightly better.
Well, is he saying that he's better, or is he saying that he...
No, he's not saying he's better. He's saying that he interprets his white contemporaries as seeing him as in some way better.
I see, yes. But I think the principle that goes behind the overcorrection would be something resembling retribution, right? I don't know how much you buy into retributivism, generally speaking, but to me,
huge factor.
The interesting point about this is if we consider, because you say how far would it go? How do we know when it's done? Well, retribution implies like for like, right? It implies kind of a eye for eye type approach, meaning that it may be the case that these people, by wanting some kind of retribution, they say the overcompensating is done when as much damage has been done to you as has historically been done to us, which is obviously a disastrous approach.
I think that's what we're going through from some people.
But is there any legitimacy to the retributive approach of saying, well, listen, you've punched me in the face, and you could say, well, look, do we want to fix this by becoming equal and no longer anybody punching each other in the face, or do I get to punch you back?
Well, there's an added layer of complexity to this. That
is not correct. It's more like you have caused me to be in a situation that sucks. Not you, but society. The previous society has caused me to be in a situation that sucks. Can the current society help me get out of this situation that was caused by the previous society? And you can't make some analogy of people punching each other in the face. That's just never going to work.
Right,
That's
because
dumb analogy.
Like a fight happens over the space of a few minutes, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and I guess the best analogy would be you punched me in the face and caused me lifelong distress. So can I sue you for the damages that you caused me? And the answer is yes. No one would say that the answer should be no right there, right? If I punch you in the face and I destroy your eye socket and you have to live with pain and distress for the rest of your life, I owe you.
Right. That's weird. I get the feeling that Doug Murray has never been in a fist fight. Which is actually kind of shocking, if you think about it, because of the
it's good. No one should be in fistfights,
right? But it's also it's
unless it's your job.
It's also right. But even then, I'm not really big into blood sport. But
yeah,
it's not even. If it were that claim, that would be one thing. But the claim is something like, historically, you punched somebody like me, so I can punch you now.
I think it's more like historically you punched somebody, and as a result of that, I'm suffering.
Well,
whether or not you agree with that, that's more accurately the claim,
people,
surely.
We've recently seen the interesting attempt by some people to do gay reparations, piggybacking on the back of
who's doing that
in America for Black Americans. And this just goes to show the fact that this stuff can just spill out everywhere because some people just want a bit of cash. And
Goes out everywhere.
What's going on with some people?
Yeah. Next thing you know,
No, I think that
the trees will want.
I think
reparate.
the attempt to
I don't know what would ridiculous thing is he going to say
the
here?
attempt to claim suffering because a forebear suffered.
No. It's not that this punching in the face is like the dumbest fucking thing anyway. Like it's literally the dumbest version of this, right? Because yeah, if somebody who looks like me punched a black person, fucking 100 years ago, that doesn't fucking really do anything, right? Like that was solved in the moment, and the black person was probably arrested for their face getting in the way of a white person's fist. But if people like me were involved in redlining all the way up through the 80s as a matter of law for who could move where, well then yeah, maybe some retribution is in order, and that retribution in capitalist society, fucking, it's the money, baby. It's the money. It's the money from not being able to build generational wealth.
Yeah, he has this idea that that racism was solved generations ago, and people complaining now haven't been affected at all by systemic racism. But it's like there are people who are currently living through systemic racism, whose society is currently wronging. Like today, right now.
Open because I don't see how you close it.
So
I don't see how you close it from it. Let me give you a quick example of that.
Sure.
Again, I'm interested in us trying to have reasonable attitudes towards ourselves as well as towards our past. And if you take the view that, for instance, there are people today who suffer because of their gender, sex, sexual orientation, or race, and they suffer because a forebear suffered, for instance, you, among other things, you engage in so many lies, but one of the lies is that everybody who wasn't of your group was somehow part of, therefore, the oppressor group.
Wait, no, there were other groups that were oppressed. That's just not true.
Yeah, literally no one has said that.
And you're not like the suffering isn't the same generation to generation. It's now economic, right? It's like, yeah, there's the overt racism, don't get me wrong, but it's far less common than it was in the fucking 50s or whatever. But like my parents were still alive my parents were alive before the Civil Rights Act passed. My parents were alive when my mom was alive when women couldn't have a credit card if they were married. They would have to prove that they were employed and not married. This isn't like some faraway past. This is like my parents' generation. I think Doug Murray's maybe around my age or a little bit older. This is his parents' generation. We're not talking about like the fucking 1600s here.
Yeah, my parents as well were alive well before. Like my dad was a teenager when the Civil Rights Act passed.
So like I don't know how long it has to be after like we get rid of like institutionalized redlining, and by institutionalized I don't mean that it still happens today. Realtors, people like real estate agents still do it, right? There's still neighborhoods where they probably won't show you a house if you're black. But like this like ended in the late 70s or the early 80s as a matter of law. So like how quickly is everybody supposed to like how quickly is everything supposed to balance out as far as like generational wealth? Like I don't understand like what he thinks is supposed to have happened. Like I just lose it. Lose the thread. I just lose the thread there.
I think it's because he's not arguing from a point of he's arguing from the point of a racist. Like we already know that he doesn't think very highly of black people. So he doesn't really care how he gets to his conclusion. You know, the argument doesn't matter. He's got his conclusion.
Right. And, you know, I mean, his problem, because because he's in the UK, is going to be more likely going to be immigrate, like the people who are subject to racism in the UK. There's a lot of people from India whose heritage is from India there. A lot of Pakistanis there too. So like, it's not going to be analogous one-to-one to the black experience, but it's going to be pretty close. And that's who he's concerned about. That's who he's worried about, like immigrating to the UK, right? That's his great replacement, is going to be people mostly from the Middle East or South Asia. Because that's, you know, it's just the remnants of the British Empire. And it's just, I'm having such a hard time following what he's saying here, because this kind of discrimination written into law, at least in the United States, like I was alive, I think, while there was still redlining, like just for a couple of years, while there was still like institutionalized legal redlining, I think I was still alive. My God.
An average white British person today must in some way put up with some overcompensation the other way, when in actual fact most of our own ancestors did not spend the 15th, 16th, 17th, 18th and 19th century just living in clover, but scratched out a living, died far too young, had lives of horrible toil to just provide for their families. And it wasn't like they were massive beneficiaries.
Yeah, everyone shed a tear for the slave owners, is what he's saying.
Systemically racist society. It's such an unfair interpretation of what our forebears went through in a country like Britain.
I mean, there's a lot to unpack there. I mean, I suppose you could say that they perhaps were to say that they were benefiting seems ridiculous because they were suffering so much, but you could still say that perhaps they were suffering less than other people were.
But again, we get into this, I mean, whether they were suffering or not. I mean,
but it doesn't matter.
Weigh this stuff up.
Of course, it's a silly argument. But allow me.
Wait, why is it a silly argument?
In the way that
I mean, the way you're framing it, the way you're presenting it, sure, it sounds silly, but that's because of the context. Because there's no like third person there to be like, excuse me, no, the here's the argument. Like, right, like you or me even aren't sitting there and going, hold the fuck on.
Mm-hmm.
This is like a cartoon. They're like arguing against a cartoonized version of like historic oppression.
Yeah, now they're both straw manning.
I feel like is perhaps the argument, and people who are putting it the way you're putting it are not fully understanding the point, which is like, it's not that somebody in my ancestry suffered, and because they suffered at the hands of somebody else. If you're a descendant of that somebody else, you deserve the retribution. It's like, well, not only have I suffered as a result of that historical injustice, but you've benefited from it. So it's not by virtue of you being part of the ancestry that caused the harm in the past. It's by virtue of you now benefiting from that, right? That's the argument I hear. How would you respond?
Well,
to
like
that?
this is okay. So there's still an issue with that interpretation here. It is not. The idea of reparations isn't let's take from specifically white people and give to black people. That's not the idea. The idea of reparations is society has harmed black people. Historically, currently, society has caused black people to suffer. So society as a whole should remedy that, should help build back, the black portions of their society, to get them, support to undo some of that damage that centuries of systemic oppression has caused. So the idea isn't like, I'm going to take from you as a white person and give to this black person. The idea is society gives to a race of people who has been systemically oppressed for hundreds of years.
Right, because the argument they're making would kind of assume that because I don't have British ancestry, if I showed up in Britain all of a sudden, that I wouldn't have privilege, or I wouldn't benefit from the privilege of white Britons because my ancestors didn't specifically oppress anyone in Britain because they weren't fucking there. Or maybe they were. I was never into that weird genealogy shit. Those people freak me out. But but I would still show up and benefit from whiteness. And people who show up there who aren't white are still going to show up and suffer the historic, like, the ramifications of non-whiteness. So it's like, isn't about like your ancestors. Do you know what I'm saying? It's it's overly individualized.
Mm-hmm.
There are so many things. One problem in this whole thing is, like, who's going to do the accounting on this? Like, seriously, who are the accountants?
Not you.
I mean, people.
The government is going to do the accounting.
Trying are the people who also want
The
to be
government.
beneficiaries.
That's the answer. He's not looking for a real answer, but the actual answer is the government.
I mean, what if we agreed, for instance, that we should draw up a list of suffering people in history and find a way to compensate people for it?
Yeah.
We might find, for instance,
Great idea.
at the
I'm all
top
for
of
it.
the list of races that have suffered are the Jews.
Yeah, you know what though?
I would.
Hold on. Your whole shit falls apart because the fucking Germans did reparations.
Yep. Yeah, I would agree. That's the right thing to do, and it was done.
So fucking
To a certain extent.
I mean, like,
And you know what? It wasn't done to Asian people in California,
right, because we're America.
and it should have been.
Absolutely.
Do we do some massive house-to-house money taking
Right.
and give it to the Jews?
No, it's called
What the
taxes, you
fuck?
fucking moron.
Like, again, he's just like, every society that has oppressed the Jews has not done this, but the Germans saw fit to do it after World War II, after they reconstituted their government into something less Nazi. like, was it perfect?
Yeah,
No. Like, I don't know. I don't even know that much about it. I just know that it happened. I don't know the details, and it fucking happened a very long time ago, and fucking it seemed like it was the right thing to do. He's just wrong. He's just like the most recent example of a fucking massive atrocity, like against a group of people in Europe. There were reparations paid.
Yeah, and it was the right thing to do. I have to imagine right here he's playing stupid, because I can't imagine that someone would be that stupid. Like, it is hard to think that his brain is so fucking broken that he can't figure out that reparations would come from taxes.
Man. Okay, so the other thing, if we let's grant him, and I don't think that, maybe, I don't know that if he's wrong. Let's grant him that over the course of history, Jewish folks have been the most likely to be displaced, slaughtered, whatever. Well, when you go look through all these movements for people's civil rights, especially in America, guess who's standing right next to those people? A lot of fucking Jewish people. That's who's standing right next to those people. Why are they there?
Yeah.
Why were there a lot of Jewish people in the civil rights movement? I'd like to. I mean, I think I know the answer. It's called empathy. But I mean,
Yeah.
like, what the fuck? Like, what is he even, like, this is, I'm going to start getting fucking pretty mad here pretty soon, I think. I don't usually get super angry on stream. I'm going to start getting pissed off here.
I just, where on earth would this end? You know,
presumably it would end after that if we managed to actually account for everything. Because, of course, like...
How about...
Oh, they're Nirvana fallacying it now. Good job. Thanks.
Would easily follow that.
Yeah.
My forebears...
Yeah, we can't do anything good because when are we going to stop?
...country and its liberties than your forebears. Therefore,
I can't eat ice cream because then I'll just keep eating ice cream forever.
Okay, people could do that.
They could.
They could easily do that.
But they
next.
wouldn't, because that would be silly, right? But
Well, it's all silly at some point
Yeah.
because we're looking at history as some kind of bank that where deposits have been put that are being kept from us.
Yeah.
And that at some
Well, no, but banks, no. I'm looking at generational wealth as a kind of bank because it operates
Yeah.
in much the same way, actually.
Yeah, it operates Literally like a bank.
In fact,
Yeah. I put
in fact,
my
some of
money
that
in
wealth,
the beginning,
you know where
and
that wealth,
now I have a lot of money. This person wasn't allowed to put their money in the beginning,
right? You
and
know,
now they don't have a lot of money
you know where the generational wealth tends to be stored?
in the bank.
Or property, maybe, but yeah, but you could turn,
Yeah, probably mostly property.
you could turn that into money, and where would you put the money? The bank. So the bank analogy works pretty well, actually, dude. Sorry.
Yeah. Money is stored in the balls.
And the interest rates are pretty high.
And I, as I say,
That's
if
why
you
they call it a
start
coin
this-
purse, right?
Yeah. What's
So
the end?
I just think a reasonable attitude towards history, among other things, would help us to have a more reasonable attitude towards the present. But the whole thing is being interpreted in this extraordinary zero-sum, highly retributive way. And one other thing, if I may, just to add to that, is
Yeah.
I'm obsessed by this issue. I wrote about it quite a lot in The Strange Death of Europe.
I mean, he's interpreting it in a zero-sum game. He's saying if we give anything to black people at all, it comes out of my wallet as a white person. That's literally what he's doing. He himself is interpreting it as a zero-sum game.
And it's because of the way taxation works. Funny enough, some of the taxes that black people paid would go to the reparations, right? Like just
That's
because of
true.
the fucking
Yep.
fungible nature of money. You can't be like, oh,
Yep.
this is just actually the white people taxes. That's not how the fucking money works.
Yeah.
Forgiveness. As you know, I write a chapter about it in The Manners of Crowds. But why we spend no time thinking about the mechanisms of forgiveness, which, as you know, I quote Hannah Arendt on in this book, which is just something fascinating to me. We are living in societies where guilt.
He wants to be forgiven
blame,
for having
including
white
historic
privilege.
guilt and
That's what he's saying.
are made to be
He's saying-
overwhelming for
No one should take it away. I just want to be forgiven for it.
certain groups of people. But we have no thought about what the mechanisms of forgiveness would be. But here's the other problem from that is that
One part of forgiveness actually is oftentimes a little bit of comeuppance for the person who is going to be doing the
money.
forgiving, right?
Yeah.
Like it's a little easier to forgive. Like if I take your car out, right, and I crash it, well, it's going to be a little easier for you to forgive me after I replaced your car, right?
Yep. Yeah, it certainly would. Yeah.
I don't, if I accidentally set your house on fire somehow, well, it's easier to forgive me for it if I can fucking help you rebuild your house or whatever. Like, come on, man.
Yeah. Or let's say, it wasn't even your responsibility. Let's say you have a son and I let your son borrow my car and he crashed it, right? And then you pay for it. It'd be a lot easier for me to forgive your son for it if you paid for it.
Oh, that's going the other direction, but I see because I didn't crash the car, but it's still to some extent still my responsibility.
Yep.
Oh, okay. We're like way up against it here. We're pushing up against 2 hours. So I think this is as good a place to stop for the pod as any.
Yeah, you were absolutely right. That was incredibly frustrating, and I am extremely disappointed in Alex of Cosmic Skeptic. I'm definitely no longer a fan of that guy. I looked it up, and I am not subscribed to his YouTube channel, so I don't have to unsubscribe.
Yeah, I mean, I just like he's been doing this for a long enough time that we can't really be like, well, he's young and inexperienced, right? Because he's probably been broadcasting longer than I have.
Possibly, yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
I am older and I've had more life experience or whatever, and we could grant some stuff because I think he's still under 25, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I think he was 24 when we looked it up.
But that, like, if that's the case and you're not like really ready to challenge people, maybe don't have people like Douglas Murray on your fucking show. Like you could just
and
not,
either he's not ready or he's not willing.
right? You could just not have Douglas Murray on. And my guess here is there may be a way in which his numbers started to plateau, right? Or even maybe started to go down because like we've said before about like, why did the new atheists all get into this culture war shit? It's like, well, you can't you got to go somewhere from like just doing the same kind of skeptic or the same kind of, oh, Jesus isn't real content. It's been our criticism of new atheism, or at least mine, is that like, well, they couldn't, if they were going to delve into culture war issues, they should have done it like better or maybe not at all. And it's like, maybe it's one of those things where he's like, well, I have to keep growing this if I'm going to continue to do this for a living. And I, you know, if I want to continue to up my standard of living or whatever. And if I'm going to do that, the fucking route for me as a skeptic is more Douglas Murray, less Matt Dillahunty, right? Like,
I think if you're doing that, something's wrong. You should not be feeding your family off platforming white supremacists. Just the end.
Right. And like I mentioned that about the recent, I don't want to get into it too much, but the recent thing with the Young Turks, I mentioned it on Sunday, is that maybe they saw their numbers starting to plateau. So they dipped their little toes into the fucking turf pool to see if maybe that fucking would get them some new love and some new subscribers. And I feel like that it requires so few assumptions to think that that's likely what's going on here. This guy has seen like the meteoric rise of some of these kind of IDW and like, you know, sort of racism critical or like SJW critical people. He saw the rise of them. And I think that it just doesn't take a lot of assumptions to think that that's probably what's going on here, even if he's telling himself that something else is going on here.
Yeah. Very sad.
And I would also be really surprised actually if you have Douglas Murray on and if you're not already like Sam Harris or like a friend of his, I'd be really surprised if this guy didn't get a rider that he had to sign saying, you will not call me a racist. You will, you know what I mean? Like, I know Brett Weinstein has a rider, and I'd be willing to bet this guy has a rider that he sends to people and it constrains people. But I just wouldn't sign such a thing. And I don't know that to be the case, but I'm just like, we're just watching.
Yeah. And I would say signing something like that is unethical.
Right.
It's unethical to have someone on who's espousing these kind of views and promise that you won't criticize them.
Right. Or that you won't do it in a harsh way, or that you will not engage in like, his would probably say something like, you will not assess my character in a negative way or something like that. Right. That's sort of the language I would assume is in these kinds of things. But I don't know. I don't know for sure. I do know that Brett Weinstein has a rider. And if I had to sign something like that before I interviewed somebody, the only way I would ever do it is I would stipulate that after the interview that I would be allowed to make the rider public.
Yeah. That's a good one.
But I just wouldn't sign. I'd be like, get the fuck out of here. Get the fuck out of here. This is sad because I hadn't seen a lot of his videos, but my impression of this young man was that he was a fairly nice guy, that he didn't seem racist, that he didn't seem like, it seemed like he was just kind of, it seemed like, and maybe it's just like same as me bias or whatever, that I thought maybe he was like a progressive or at least like a center left kind of liberal, and center left liberal in the UK is more like a progressive here generally. And like, you don't have to do this. Doing this is a choice. And this is a bad choice. And
yep.
I don't know how, I mean, I looked in the comments and he was getting, I mean, check the comments on this, everybody. He wasn't getting a lot of pushback from his fans because that skeptic community, you know, it is what it is.
Well, I'm certainly going to comment on it and, you know, let them know what I think. I would not recommend anyone else to do that.
Yeah. Well, we can't. But if you, don't ever have a hero, man. Because this guy's pretty young, and he probably wasn't. Oh no, his audience probably trends young too. Now that I think about it, oh no,
probably. Yep.
Well, this was unsettling. I'm sorry, and if you've listened to the whole show, I'm proud of you. And if you've listened to the whole show, this is going to be one of those rare instances where I'm going to read out the show. Thanks everybody for checking out the Intellectual Dollar Tree. Make sure you're following on your podcatcher of choice. We're also on YouTube and Odyssey, though I don't recommend clicking around too much on Odyssey. You can support us at patreon.com or at eplex.store. You can buy merch there, or you can join a Patreon-like subscription there. This is going to be Boomers by Periscope. When we come back, the lights will have changed colors, and the contents of at least my drink will have changed. And we're not going to watch the rest of this shit. Fuck that. See everybody in red light.